A few hours before losing everything, a millionaire CEO spots a street child holding the briefcase with the missing contract. He abandons the meeting, runs to her, and discovers that fate is offering him more than a second chance. Upon recovering the document, he also finds a story marked by hunger, abandonment, and courage. From that unlikely encounter, something greater than any company is born, a life transformed, and another rebuilt. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. Let's continue. I promise this will be the best story you'll ever hear in your life. The morning arrived with that grey light that often precedes difficult days. Franklin Caldwell woke up at 5 in the morning, as he always did, but this time his sleep had not been restful. At 43, he was well acquainted with the weight of important decisions, but he had never imagined he would face a moment like this. From the 25th floor of his office on Park Avenue, he watched New York City slowly awaken, its first buses cutting through the still empty streets, and the sky tinged with orange hues that would soon be swallowed by the daily smog. Franklin had built Caldwell Engineering over 15 years of tireless work. He started alone with a rented office in Chinatown and transformed that initial dream into one of the most respected construction firms in the city. Residential and commercial buildings, urban infrastructure projects. His name was engraved on plaques all over the city, but on that morning, none of it seemed to matter. In 4 hours, the most important meeting of his professional life would begin. The company's main investors would be present, along with representatives from the board of directors and, of course, Morris Bradford. Morris, his former partner, who had left the partnership 3 years ago citing strategic differences, but who in truth had never accepted that Franklin had taken sole majority control of the company. Since then, Morris had been working behind the scenes, fueling rumors, questioning decisions, trying to undermine the investors' confidence, and now finally he had gotten what he wanted, a serious accusation of embezzlement in a public works project. Forged documents, altered contracts, signatures that looked like Franklin's, but which he swore he had never made. It was a perfect trap. And the only document that could prove his innocence, the original contract with all the real terms and the notarized signatures, had disappeared. Franklin had torn his office apart for days. He searched every drawer, every file, every folder. He spoke with his secretary, with the lawyers, with the administrative team. No one knew where the document was. It was as if it had vanished into thin air, and without it, Franklin had no way to defend himself. He only had scanned copies which Morris and his allies claimed were easily manipulated. He needed the paper, the original, with the notary's seal, the ink signatures, the initials on every page. His lawyer, Dr. Helen Moore, a 50-year-old woman with decades of experience in corporate law, was trying to build a defense based on witnesses and secondary documents, but they both knew it was flimsy. In the conference room next door, Helen and her team had been working since 6 in the morning, preparing presentations, organizing arguments, trying to find legal loopholes that could buy them time. Franklin stepped away from the window and walked to the coffee table, where a cup of already cold coffee awaited him. He picked up his phone and saw dozens of messages. Concerned clients, business partners wanting to know what was happening, journalists asking for interviews. He didn't answer any of them. He didn't have the strength. He had no words. He thought about the company, about every employee who depended on him, about the families who lived in the buildings he built, about the projects still on paper waiting for financing approval. Everything could crumble in a matter of hours. His reputation, built brick by brick over 15 years, could be destroyed by well-architected lies and the absence of a single piece of paper. He returned to the window. Down below, Park Avenue was beginning to get busy. Hurrying executives, street vendors setting up their carts, students walking towards the subway. Life went on, indifferent to each person's private drama. Franklin had always found comfort in watching that scene. It reminded him that the world was bigger than his problems, but today that view only heightened his anguish. That's when he saw it. In the middle of the sidewalk, near the entrance to a shopping arcade, there was a child, a small girl who couldn't have been more than 8 or 9 years old. She was barefoot, in worn and dirty clothes, her disheveled hair falling over her face, and in her arms, clutched against her chest as if it were the most precious thing in the world. She held a brown leather executive briefcase. Franklin's heart seemed to stop for a moment. That briefcase was identical to the one he used. No, it couldn't just be similar. He moved closer to the window, straining his eyes. The briefcase had a specific detail, an octagonal gold buckle custom-made, which he had ordered himself from a shop on Madison Avenue. There were no two briefcases like that one. Franklin felt a jolt of adrenaline course through his body. Without a second thought, he left the meeting room, strode down the hallway, ignored the receptionist's greeting, and got into the elevator. He pressed the button for the ground floor with so much force that his fingers hurt. 25 floors had never seemed so long. Every second was an eternity. What if the girl left? What if he lost sight of her? The elevator finally opened on the ground floor. Franklin crossed the marble lobby, went through the revolving doors, and stepped out onto the sidewalk. The morning light hit him hard, momentarily blurring his vision. He looked around, searching. There. The girl was about 50 yards away, walking slowly, still clutching the briefcase. Franklin started to run. He didn't care about the curious stares of passers-by, about his suit starting to wrinkle, about his tie swinging from side to side. He ran like he hadn't run in years, feeling his heart pound in his chest, his breath becoming ragged. When he finally reached the girl, he had to lean against a lamppost to catch his breath. The girl stopped and stared at him with suspicion. Her eyes were large, brown, with a depth that didn't match her apparent age. She took a step back, clutching the briefcase even tighter against her body. Franklin raised his hands in a gesture of peace, trying to control his breathing. "Please don't be afraid. I just want to talk to you." The girl didn't answer. She continued to stare at him, ready to bolt at any moment. Franklin swallowed hard and tried again, this time with a calmer voice. "That briefcase you're holding, where did you find it?" The girl tilted her head slightly but remained silent. "Look, I'm not going to hurt you. I'm not going to call the police. I'm not going to do anything. I just need to know where you found this briefcase, please." The girl finally spoke. Her voice was thin but firm. "Found it on the street. It's mine now." Franklin felt a mix of relief and desperation. It was the one. It had to be. "Do you know what's inside that briefcase?" The girl shrugged. "Papers, a bunch of paper, with small print." Franklin crouched down, getting on her level. He tried to seem as non-threatening as possible. "Those papers are very important to me. Very important. I lost this briefcase a few days ago and have been desperately looking for it. Could you give it back to me, please?" The girl studied him for a long moment. Then she clutched the briefcase even tighter. "What's in it for me?" Franklin was taken aback by the question. This child, so small and seemingly vulnerable, had a negotiating ability he hadn't expected. "I can give you money. How much do you want?" The girl shook her head. "I don't know how to use money right. Someone always takes it or I lose it. I want something else." "What?" "Food. And a place to sleep tonight. No cops, no shelter, no one asking my name or taking me somewhere. Just you, me, food, and a warm place." Franklin felt something tighten in his chest. He looked at the child more closely. Her clothes were beyond dirty. They were tattered. Her bare feet had calluses and small wounds. Her face, despite the dirt, showed signs of malnourishment. She wasn't just asking for food. She was negotiating her survival. "Okay," Franklin agreed, a lump forming in his throat. "Food and a place to sleep. You give me the briefcase and I'll take care of you today, I promise." The girl stared at him for a few more seconds, as if assessing whether she could trust him. Finally, she nodded. "Food first, then the briefcase." Franklin agreed. He held out his hand, and the girl, after hesitating, took it. Her hand was small, rough, cold. Franklin felt a wave of emotions he couldn't name. Sadness, compassion, urgency, but also something more. A strange connection, as if this meeting wasn't just about the briefcase. They walked together down Park Avenue. Franklin noticed the curious glances from people. A man in an impeccable suit accompanied by a barefoot street girl was not a common sight, but he didn't care. He had more important things to think about. They arrived at a large deli, one of those that serve a full breakfast. Franklin opened the door and gestured for the girl to enter. She hesitated on the threshold, looking inside with an expression that mixed desire and fear. "You can come in, no one's going to kick you." "Hout, I'm here." The girl entered slowly, still clutching the briefcase. The contrast between her and the clean, organized environment of the deli was stark. Some customers watched her with disapproval, but Franklin ignored them. He led the girl to a table in the back and asked her to sit. "You can order whatever you want, literally anything you want to eat." The girl's eyes widened. She looked at the counter filled with breads, cakes, pastries, sandwiches. Then, for the first time since Franklin had seen her, she smiled. A small, shy but genuine smile. "Anything?" "Anything." Franklin called the waitress and placed a generous order. Bagels, cream cheese, a slice of carrot cake, orange juice, hot chocolate, a grilled cheese sandwich, fruit. The waitress wrote it all down with a surprised expression, but asked no questions. When the food began to arrive, the girl placed the briefcase on the chair beside her and began to eat with a voracity that broke Franklin's heart. She wasn't just hungry, she was starving. She probably hadn't had a decent meal in days, maybe weeks. Franklin watched in silence, feeling a mixture of conflicting emotions. On one hand, he was desperate for the briefcase, for the documents that could save his company. On the other, he couldn't stop thinking about this child. Where were her parents? How had she ended up on the streets? How long had she been living like this? After devouring almost everything on the table, the girl finally slowed down. She wiped her mouth with the back of her hand and looked at Franklin. "What's your name?" "Franklin." The girl nodded, as if committing the information to memory. "And yours?" Franklin asked. "Isabella." "Isabella. That's a beautiful name." She shrugged, but there was a faint blush on her dirty cheeks. "Isabella, can I ask you a few questions?" "Depends on the questions." Franklin smiled slightly. This girl was impressive. "Where do you live?" Isabella hesitated. Then, in a lower voice, she answered, "In different places. There's an overpass in Hell's Kitchen that's good when it rains, and an awning near Times Square, depends on the day." Franklin felt his chest tighten again. "And your family? Your parents?" Isabella's expression shut down. She looked away, fixing her eyes on the table. "My mom passed away 2 years ago. I never knew my dad. I don't have anyone else." Franklin didn't know what to say. They sat in silence for a moment, only the noise of the deli filling the space between them. Finally, Isabella looked back at him. "What about you? Why are these papers so important?" Franklin took a deep breath. He decided to be honest with her. "I have a company, a construction company, and a very bad man is trying to destroy everything I've built. He made up lies about me and forged documents. The only way to prove I'm telling the truth is with the papers in that briefcase. Without them, I'll lose everything. My company, my reputation, my 15 years of work, everything." Isabella watched him with those deep eyes, too wise for her age. "Was it that bad man who stole your briefcase?" Franklin shook his head. "I don't know. Maybe. Or maybe I just lost it carelessly. I can't remember exactly what happened. I was so stressed, so worried. I just know that one day it was with me, and the next day it was gone." "And when I give it back, you'll go back to that tall building and save your company?" Franklin nodded. "Yes, I'll try." Isabella was thoughtful for a moment. Then she leaned over and picked up the briefcase from the chair beside her. She placed it on the table between them. "I found it 3 days ago. It was thrown under a trash can near Bryant Park. It was raining and the briefcase was wet. I opened it to see if there was anything useful inside, but it was just these papers. I thought about throwing them away, but the briefcase is nice and sturdy. I thought I could use it to keep my things." Franklin slowly reached for the briefcase, but Isabella pulled it back. "Is the promise still good? Food and a place to sleep?" "It is, I promise, Isabella." She studied him one more time, that piercing gaze seeming to see beyond appearances. Finally, she pushed the briefcase towards him. "Here. I hope your papers save your company." Franklin took the briefcase with trembling hands. He slowly unzipped it, almost afraid of what he might find. And there they were, all the documents, the original contract, the signatures, the notary stamps, all intact, though slightly wrinkled from the rain. A sigh of relief escaped his lips. "They're all here. Isabella, you have no idea what you've just done for me." Isabella shrugged, but there was a small smile on her lips. "Now are you going to take me to a place to sleep?" "I am, but first I need to go up to my office and show these documents to my lawyer. After that, I'll take care of you. Can you come with me?" Isabella hesitated. Franklin saw the fear in her eyes. "I promise everything will be okay. You'll stay in a comfortable room with a sofa, air conditioning. It even has a TV. No one will bother you. And after my meeting, we'll figure out the rest, okay?" Isabella thought for a moment, then nodded. "Okay." They left the deli and returned to the building. This time the girl was no longer alone on the sidewalk. She was beside Franklin, and something about it felt right, as if this was how things were meant to be. In the elevator, Isabella was fascinated by the lit-up buttons and the sensation of rising. Franklin realized it was probably the first time she had been in such a tall building. When the doors opened on the 25th floor, her eyes widened at the view of the city through the office windows. "It's so high you can see everything from up here." Franklin smiled. "It's true. Sometimes I spend hours just watching the city." He took her to a private waiting room with a comfortable sofa, a television, and even a small fridge with water and juice. "You can stay here. The TV remote is over there. If you need me, just ask the lady at the reception to call me. I'll be in the room next door, okay?" Isabella sat on the sofa and sank into its softness. For the first time in a long time, her body completely relaxed. "Okay." Franklin left the room and went straight to the conference room, where Helen and the team of lawyers were still working feverishly. When he walked in holding the briefcase, everyone stopped what they were doing. Helen stood up quickly. "Franklin, where have you been? The meeting starts in 2 hours and we need to finish preparing." Franklin placed the briefcase on the table with a smile that hadn't appeared on his face in days. "We no longer need to prepare based on copies. I found the original." The silence that followed was absolute. Helen approached, slowly, as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. She took the briefcase, opened it, and began to examine the documents. Her expression went from disbelief to relief, and finally to euphoria. "Franklin, is this real? Are these the originals?" "They are. All of them." "But how? Where did you find them?" Franklin glanced towards the room where Isabella was resting. "Let's just say I had some unexpected help." The next 2 hours were a whirlwind. Helen and the team reviewed every document, prepared the presentation, organized the legal arguments. Franklin took a shower in the office's private bathroom, changed his shirt, and tried to calm the nerves that were still pulsing through his veins. When it was finally time for the meeting, the conference room was full. The investors, serious and impassive, the board members, with worried expressions, and Morris Bradford, sitting in a strategic position, a confident smirk on his lips. Franklin entered the room carrying the brown leather briefcase. Morris saw him, and something in his expression changed. A shadow of doubt crossed his face. The meeting began. Morris presented his accusations with all the theatricality he could muster. He spoke of embezzlement, irregularities, forged documents. He showed his evidence, his doctored copies, his well-constructed arguments. Then it was Franklin's turn. He placed the briefcase on the table and, with calm, deliberate movements, unzipped it. He took out the original contract and placed it in the center of the table for all to see. The silence was immediate. Morris's face went pale. Helen took over from there, explaining each point of the contract, showing the authenticated signatures, the notary stamps that proved the document's authenticity. She compared them with the doctored copies Morris had presented, pointing out the differences, the manipulations, the entire sham. When she finished, there were no more doubts. Franklin was innocent, and Morris Bradford was exposed as the liar and manipulator he had always been. The investors looked at each other. The chairman of the board stood up and extended his hand to Franklin. "Mr. Caldwell, we apologize for this situation. It's clear you were the victim of a sabotage attempt. Caldwell Engineering will continue to have our full support." Franklin shook his hand, feeling an immense weight lift from his shoulders. Morris tried to defend himself, but his words sounded hollow. He left the conference room without looking back, defeated and humiliated. When everyone had finally left and the office was empty again, Franklin went back to the room where Isabella was. She had fallen asleep on the sofa, curled up, hugging a cushion. She looked so small, so fragile, so vulnerable. Franklin stood in the doorway watching her. That girl had saved everything: his company, his reputation, his life. But more than that, she had shown him something he had forgotten over the years of obsessive work and the pursuit of success. She had shown him what really mattered. He approached slowly and gently touched her shoulder. Isabella woke. With a start, her eyes wide with fear. But when she saw Franklin, she relaxed. "Is it over?" "It is. And everything went well, thanks to you." Isabella rubbed her eyes and yawned. "So now are you going to take me to a real bed to sleep in?" Franklin smiled. A real smile for the first time in weeks. "I am. And not just for tonight. I'm going to take care of you for as long as you need. You saved my life, Isabella, and I don't forget that." Isabella looked at him with those deep eyes, too wise for her age. And for the first time since her mother was gone, she felt something she thought she would never feel again. Safety. Hope. The possibility of a different future. They left the office together, Franklin and Isabella, as the sun began to set over New York City. Two strangers who had met by chance in a moment of desperation. Two destinies that crossed on a Park Avenue sidewalk and that, without knowing it yet, were about to change forever. Franklin took Isabella to a hotel near Park Avenue. Nothing too ostentatious, but comfortable, clean, safe. He asked for a room with 2 beds, explained to the receptionist that the girl was his niece, and they needed a place to spend the night. The receptionist looked at Isabella with a somewhat suspicious expression, but Franklin paid in cash, and there were no more questions. In the room, Isabella stood in the middle of the floor, observing everything with a mixture of fascination and distrust. The cold air conditioning, the beds made with impeccable white sheets, the flat-screen TV, the bathroom with a glass shower enclosure. All of it was so far from the reality she knew that it seemed unreal, as if she had stepped into a parallel world. Franklin noticed her hesitation and spoke softly. "You can relax. This room is yours for as long as you need. That bed right there is all yours." Isabella took a few cautious steps toward the bed. She touched the mattress with her hand, testing its softness. Then, without warning, she threw herself onto it, face down, and sank into the comfort. A deep sigh escaped her lips. "It's so soft. It feels like a cloud." Franklin smiled, but his heart ached. How many nights had this child spent sleeping on hard sidewalks, in cold awnings, under noisy overpasses? How many times had she woken up cold, hungry, scared? "Isabella, you need to take a shower. I'll ask the hotel to bring up some clean clothes for you, okay?" Isabella rolled over onto her back, looking at the ceiling. "It's been a long time since I had a hot shower. In the shelters, there's always a line and the water is cold. Sometimes I can't even get in." Franklin once again felt that tightness in his chest that he'd been feeling since he found her on the sidewalk. "Here, the shower is. Hot and all yours. No one will rush you. You can stay as long as you want." Isabella got up from the bed and looked at the bathroom with curiosity. Franklin walked her there, showed her how the shower worked, where the clean towels, soaps, and shampoos were. All of it was so mundane to him, but for her it was like being on another planet. While Isabella showered, Franklin called the front desk and asked them to arrange for some children's clothes. Sweatpants, a t-shirt, a pair of sneakers, socks, underwear. He also ordered food. Much more food than 2 people would normally eat, because he had a feeling Isabella was still hungry, despite the generous breakfast they had shared hours earlier. When Isabella finally came out of the bathroom, wrapped in a white robe that was much too big for her, her hair still dripping, she looked like a different person. Without the layer of dirt that had covered her face, Franklin could see her features clearly for the first time. She had large, expressive eyes, long eyelashes, a small, delicate nose. She was a beautiful child, with features that reminded him of someone. But who? Franklin couldn't place it. The clothes arrived with the food. Isabella chose a pink t-shirt and grey sweatpants. She got dressed in the bathroom and returned to the room looking incredibly younger and more vulnerable than before. Without the armor of dirt and torn clothes, she was just a child who had been forced to grow up too fast. They ate together, sitting at the small table in the room. Isabella devoured her food again, but this time with a bit more calm. Between bites she began to talk, small things at first, about what it was like to sleep on the streets, about the dangers she faced, about the people who helped her and those who hurt her. Franklin listened in silence, trying not to show the horror he felt. This child had lived more in her few years than many adults would in decades. She had seen things no child should ever see, had faced situations no human being should ever have to face. "Your mother, what was she like?" Franklin asked during a pause. Isabella was silent for a moment, looking at her plate. Then, in a softer voice, she began to speak. "She was beautiful. She worked hard, cleaned houses, offices, anything she could find, but she never had enough money. We lived in a tiny room in a boarding house in Hell's Kitchen. It was cramped, but it was ours. She always told me that one day we would have a real house, with a yard and everything. She promised." Isabella's voice began to tremble, but she continued. "Then she got sick. She started coughing a lot, losing weight. She tried to keep working, but it got to a point where she couldn't anymore. She lost her job, we lost the room, we went to a shelter. But she didn't get better. She kept getting worse. One day she had to go to the hospital and I was left alone at the shelter. And then she was gone. And I was truly alone." Franklin reached across the table and gently touched Isabella's hand. She didn't pull away. Her eyes were shining with tears she was trying to hold back. "You've been so strong, Isabella. Stronger than any child should ever have to be." Isabella wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I didn't have a choice. When you're alone, you either get strong or you don't survive." Franklin felt something shift inside him at that moment. A decision began to form in his mind, still hazy, but becoming clearer. He couldn't just let this girl go back to the streets, not after everything she had done for him, not after hearing her story, not after looking into her eyes and seeing so much pain, but also so much strength and hope. "Isabella, I made you a promise today, food and a place to sleep, but I want to do something more, much more." Isabella looked at him with curiosity and a bit of caution. "What?" Franklin took a deep breath. He hadn't fully thought through all the implications, but he knew this was the right thing to do. "I want you to stay with me. Not just tonight, but for as long as you need. I have a large apartment with empty rooms. I can afford to give you food, clothes, and education, everything you need. You don't have to go back to the streets, ever again." Isabella fell silent, processing his words. Then, with a voice full of the suspicion accumulated from years on the streets, she asked, Why would you do that? Nobody does anything for free. What do you want in return?" The question was harsh, but Franklin understood. Isabella had learned the hard way that the world was not a generous place, that people always wanted something in return. "I don't want anything in return, Isabella. You've already given me more than I can ever repay. You saved my company, my life. But that's not why I'm making this offer. It's because I look at you and I see someone who deserves a chance. Someone who has been treated unfairly by life and who deserves so much more than what she's had so far. And because, selfishly perhaps, I feel like I need to do this. I feel like our meeting wasn't an accident. I feel like I have a responsibility to you." Isabella continued to look at him, those deep eyes trying to decipher if he was telling the truth. "And if I accept, will I be like a maid? Will I have to clean, cook, do things for you?" Franklin shook his head vehemently. "No, absolutely not. You'll be a child. You'll go to school, play, have friends, have a normal life, with no obligations other than being yourself and letting me take care of you." Isabella lowered her gaze to her plate. Franklin could see the internal battle happening inside her. Fear of trusting, the desire to believe, hope fighting against the cynicism that life on the streets had taught her. Finally, she looked up at him again. "Can I think about it until tomorrow?" Franklin smiled gently. "You can take all the time you need. But I want you to know that, regardless of your decision, I will make sure you have a safe place to stay if you don't. Want to stay with me? I will find a good family who wants to adopt you. I will make sure you never have to sleep on the street again. I promise you that." Isabella nodded slowly. Then, unexpectedly, she stood up from her chair, walked around the table, and hugged him. A quick, almost shy hug, but full of meaning. When she pulled away, her eyes were shining again, but this time it wasn't just sadness. It was also gratitude. That night, Franklin slept in the other bed in the room. He lay awake for hours, listening to Isabella's soft breathing, thinking about all the changes his life was about to undergo. He was 43, had never married, had never seriously considered having children. His life was the company. But now, suddenly, he felt he had found a greater purpose, something that went beyond business contracts and the buildings he constructed. When he finally fell asleep, he dreamed of a house full of life, with the voices of children, with laughter and games. He dreamed of a future that, until yesterday, he had never imagined for himself. The next morning, Isabella woke up before him. When Franklin opened his eyes, she was sitting on her bed, looking out the window at the city below. He sat up and waited. He knew she was making a decision. After a few minutes, Isabella turned to him. "I accept, but on one condition." Franklin felt his heart race. "What condition?" "If you're going to help me, I want us to help other kids too. There are a lot of people like me on the streets. A lot of kids who are alone, hungry, scared. If I'm going to have this good fortune, I want others to have it too." Franklin felt his eyes burn. This girl, who had every right to be selfish after all she had been through, was thinking of others. She was thinking of using her own good luck to create luck for others. "That is a condition I accept with great pride, Isabella. We will help as many children as we can, together." Isabella smiled, a true smile that lit up her entire face. And Franklin knew in that moment that his life would never be the same, and he was perfectly okay with that. The following days were a whirlwind. Franklin contacted social workers, lawyers specializing in adoption, child psychologists. He explained the situation, his desire to adopt Isabella, the circumstances of their meeting. There was a lot of protocol, a lot of bureaucracy, many evaluations to be done. But Franklin was determined. He used all his resources, all his contacts, to expedite the process without violating any laws or important procedures. Meanwhile, he brought Isabella to live in his apartment. It was a spacious place on the Upper East Side, with 3 bedrooms, a large living room with a view of the city, a modern kitchen that Franklin rarely used because he always ate out. The apartment had always been just a place to sleep between one workday and the next. But with Isabella there, it suddenly came to life. They chose her room together, the largest of the guest rooms, with a window that overlooked a tree full of birds. Franklin hired a decorator and let Isabella choose the colors, the furniture, the details. She chose shades of blue and green, colors that reminded her of the sky and nature. She wanted a calm space, she explained, a place where she could breathe. The decorator worked quickly. In a week, the room was ready, a new bed, a wardrobe, a desk, a bookshelf filled with books, a soft rug, light curtains. When Isabella saw the final result, she stood in silence for a long moment, just looking. Then, with a choked voice, she said, "I've never had a room of my own, not even when I lived with my mum. We always shared space with other people." Franklin placed a hand on her shoulder. "You have one now, and it will always be yours." Isabella's integration into Franklin's life was surprisingly natural. She was a smart, observant child who learned quickly. Franklin hired a tutor to assess her educational level and prepare a personalized teaching plan. He discovered that despite having missed years of formal schooling, Isabella could read and write reasonably well. Her mother had taught her the basics before she got sick, but there were many gaps, many concepts she had never learned. The tutor, Mrs. Sylvia, a kind lady with grey hair and round glasses, fell in love with Isabella from their first meeting. She started coming to the apartment 3 times a week, bringing books, exercises, educational games. Isabella absorbed everything with a thirst for knowledge that was impressive. She asked constant questions, wanting to understand not just the what, but also the why of things. Franklin, between business meetings and corporate commitments, started coming home earlier, something he had never done before. He wanted to have dinner with Isabella, hear about her day, help her with her homework when she needed it. He discovered that he enjoyed those conversations at the table, those simple moments of companionship. One evening, while they were washing dishes together, Isabella asked something that took him by surprise. "Franklin, can I call you Dad?" Franklin stopped what he was doing. He turned to her. She was looking at him with a mixture of hope and fear of rejection. He knelt to be at her eye level and held her hands. "Isabella, it would be the greatest honor of my life if you called me Dad, but only do it if it's what you really want. No pressure, in your own time." Isabella thought for a moment. Then, with a small smile on her lips, she said, "Dad, I think I like the sound of that." Franklin hugged her, feeling tears run freely down his face for the first time in decades. They weren't tears of sadness, but of a happiness so intense it couldn't be contained. "I like it too, sweetheart, I like it too." The adoption process moved forward slowly, but it moved forward. The social worker assigned to the case, Dr. Marcia, visited the apartment regularly, observed the interaction between Franklin and Isabella, and wrote detailed reports. She was a strict woman with decades of experience, but even she couldn't hide a smile when she saw how the two had connected. Isabella started therapy with a child psychologist specializing in trauma. The sessions were difficult at first. Isabella wasn't used to talking about her feelings, about her experiences on the streets, about the loss of her mother. But gradually, with the psychologist's patience and skill, she began to open up. She started to process the pain, the fear, the loneliness she had carried for so long. Franklin also went to therapy, following the social worker's suggestion. He needed to understand his new role, to deal with the responsibilities and challenges of being a father. He discovered fears he didn't know he had. Fear of not being good enough. Fear of not knowing how to raise her. Fear of failing Isabella in the same way life had failed her until then. But his therapist helped him see that he didn't need to be perfect. He just needed to be present, to be honest, to offer love and security. The rest would come with time. 2 months after their meeting on the Park Avenue sidewalk, Franklin and Isabella were closer than ever. They had their routines, their rituals, breakfast together whenever possible, with Franklin telling funny stories from work, and Isabella talking about what she was learning with Mrs. Sylvia. Candlelit dinners on weekends, a tradition Isabella loved because it made everything feel special. Reading. Before bed, with Franklin sitting on the edge of her bed, reading chapters from children's books that he himself had never read as a child. Isabella was visibly healthier. She had gained weight, her cheeks were rosy, her eyes sparkled with life. Her hair, once tangled and lifeless, was now clean, cut and shiny. She wore colorful clothes that she chose herself, comfortable sneakers, and had even started wearing some accessories that Franklin bought for her whenever he saw something pretty in a store window. But more than the physical transformation, it was the internal transformation that was most impressive. Isabella was lighter, more relaxed. She smiled more often. She made jokes. She sang in the shower. She skipped around the house when she was excited. She was finally getting the chance to be a child. Franklin had changed too. He was calmer, more present. He learned to delegate more responsibilities at work so he could spend more time at home. He discovered simple joys he had never valued before, like listening to Isabella recite a poem she had learned, like watching her draw with colored pencils spread across the living room table, like feeling her hug when he came, home from work. But not everything was perfect. Isabella still had frequent nightmares. She would wake up in the middle of the night, sweating, crying, calling for her mother. Franklin would run to her room, turn on the light, sit on the edge of the bed, and hold her until she calmed down. He would speak in a soft voice, reminding her that she was safe, that he was there, that she would never be alone again. There were also times when Isabella would shut down. She would become quiet, distant, lost in thoughts she didn't share. Franklin learned to respect these moments, to give her space when she needed it, but always making it clear that he was available whenever she wanted to talk. One afternoon, returning from an appointment with the psychologist, Isabella asked if they could stop by Bryant Park. Franklin found the request odd, but he agreed. They parked nearby and walked to the park. Isabella guided him along a specific path until they were near a trash can. "This is where I found your briefcase," she said, pointing to the spot. "It was right there underneath, wet from the rain. I remember thinking it was a waste to throw such a nice briefcase away." Franklin looked at the spot, thinking about how such a small, seemingly insignificant moment had completely changed their lives. If you hadn't picked up that briefcase, if you hadn't kept it, if you hadn't shown up on that sidewalk on that specific day, none of this would have happened. Isabella nodded. "I think about that sometimes, whether it was luck, fate, or just coincidence. But I don't think it matters much. What matters is that it happened, and that now we're here." Franklin smiled and put his arm around her shoulders. "That's true, and I'm grateful every day that we're here." They stood there for a few more minutes in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Then they returned to the car and headed home. That night, while they were having dinner, Isabella brought up the condition she had made for accepting the adoption again, helping other children. "Dad, do you remember I said I wanted to help other kids like me?" Franklin nodded. "I remember, and I haven't forgotten. I've been thinking a lot about it." Isabella's face lit up. "And what have you been thinking?" Franklin took a deep breath. He had indeed thought a lot about it. He had spoken with lawyers, social workers, and experts in social causes. He had an idea, but he wanted to make sure Isabella agreed. "I thought about creating a foundation, an organization that works specifically with children living on the streets, that offers temporary shelter, food, education, psychological support, and works to reconnect these children with families or find adoptive families for them. I thought about investing a significant portion of Caldwell Engineering's profits in this foundation." Isabella's eyes sparkled. "Really? You would do that?" Franklin smiled. "I would. But only if you agree. Because I want you to be an active part of it. I want you to help decide how the foundation will work, what kind of programs we'll offer. You've lived that reality. You know what works and what doesn't. Your voice is the most important one in this project." Isabella was silent for a moment, processing. Then, with a determination Franklin already knew well, she said, "I accept. Let's do it. Let's get other kids off the streets. Let's give them the same chance you gave me." Franklin extended his hand across the table. "So are we partners in this?" Isabella shook his hand firmly. "We're partners." And so, while the adoption process followed its legal course, Franklin and Isabella began to plan something much bigger, something that went beyond the two of them, something that could change the lives of hundreds, perhaps thousands of children. A foundation born from the unlikely encounter between a desperate businessman and a street girl with a brown leather briefcase. A foundation that would prove that sometimes the most improbable meetings are the ones with the greatest potential to change the world. 3 months had passed since that day on Park Avenue. Franklin and Isabella's life had settled into a comfortable and loving routine. The adoption process was in its final stages, expected to be completed in a few more weeks. The foundation they planned to create already had a name, the Sidewalk Hope Foundation, and was in an advanced stage of legal and administrative structuring. Franklin had hired a specialized team to run the project: social workers, psychologists, educators, administrators. They had rented a building in Midtown Manhattan, a large space that was being renovated to temporarily house children living on the street. There would be dormitories, a cafeteria, classrooms, recreation areas, and offices for psychological counseling. Everything was designed to offer dignity and hope. Isabella was radiant. She participated in all the planning meetings her age allowed, offered opinions, suggested ideas based on her own experience. The professionals on the team were impressed by her maturity and sensitivity. She knew exactly what children on the streets needed because she had needed it herself. Mrs. Sylvia continued to come regularly for lessons. Isabella was progressing rapidly, and there was already talk of enrolling her in a regular school next semester. She was both excited and nervous about the idea. She had never attended a real school, never had friends her age, never participated in group activities, but Franklin reassured her, saying she was more than prepared and that he would be by her side every step of the way. Everything seemed to be going perfectly, until Morris Bradford reappeared. Franklin was in his office reviewing the architectural plans for the new residential building Caldwell Engineering was constructing in Scarsdale when his secretary announced an unexpected visitor. Morris Bradford was in the reception, asking to speak with him. Franklin felt a knot in his stomach. Since the disastrous meeting months, ergo Morris had practically disappeared. Rumor had it that he was having financial problems, that his own businesses were not doing well. Franklin hadn't thought much about it, too busy with his new life and his new projects. But now, with Morris here, a bad feeling washed over him. "Send him in," Franklin said, keeping his voice steady. Morris entered the room with that arrogant smile Franklin knew so well. He was well dressed, as always, but there was something different in his eyes, a hardness, a determination that wasn't there before. "Franklin, what a pleasure to see you. It's been a while." Franklin didn't stand up. He just gestured to the chair in front of his desk. "Morris, what brings you here?" Morris sat down, crossing his legs with exaggerated confidence. "I came to talk about your new life. I heard you adopted a child. A street girl, wasn't it? What a touching story." The tone was sarcastic, mocking. Franklin felt anger begin to bubble up, but he controlled himself. "If you came here to talk about my personal life, you're wasting your time. Isabella is none of your business." Morris smiled more broadly. "Ah, but that's where you're wrong. Franklin, Isabella is very much my business, especially after I found out who her mother was." Franklin felt the blood run cold in his veins. "What are you talking about?" Morris opened the briefcase he was carrying and placed some documents on the desk. Franklin picked them up with trembling hands and began to read. They were human resources documents, old documents from Caldwell Engineering. And there, on the pages yellowed with time, was the name, Julia Smith Sanders, former employee. Fired about 3 years ago on suspicion of financial irregularities. And with the documents, there was a photo. A young, beautiful woman with deep brown eyes, the same eyes as Isabella. Franklin felt as if the floor had disappeared from under his feet. Julia. Isabella's mother had worked for him, had been fired by him, or rather on his orders, based on a report that at the time seemed well-founded, but which now, looking back, he realized had many loose ends. Morris watched Franklin's reaction with satisfaction. "Ah, you remember her. Good. Let me refresh your memory. Julia Smith Sanders worked in the finance department for 2 years. She was a good employee until documents started disappearing. Small amounts, being diverted. Nothing huge, but enough to raise suspicion. You ordered an internal investigation and, when they found some inconsistencies in reports she had prepared, you fired her on the spot. No right to a defense, no benefits, nothing. She left here humiliated and destroyed." Franklin remembered. Vaguely, but he remembered. It had been a case that seemed simple at the time. Circumstantial evidence, but enough to make the decision. He had trusted the legal department's opinion and signed the termination papers. He never thought about it again. Morris continued, savoring every word. "What you don't know is that Julia was innocent. She was used as a scapegoat to cover up diversions someone else was making, someone higher up in the hierarchy who needed a culprit. And poor Julia was in the wrong place at the wrong time. After she was fired, she couldn't find a steady job, started having financial difficulties, and well, you know the rest of the story. She got sick and ended up leaving her daughter alone in the world." Franklin felt nausea rise in his throat. He looked at Julia's photo again and saw Isabella there. The same eyes, the same face shape, the resemblance was undeniable. How had he not noticed it before? Morris leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with malice. "Now imagine what will happen when this story leaks. The great businessman Franklin Caldwell, destroyer of families, who unjustly fired a single mother and drove her to misery, now tries to clear his conscience by adopting her daughter. The press will love it. Your investors will love it. Your clients will love it. Your reputation, which you worked so hard to rebuild after that episode with the contracts, will be destroyed once and for all. Franklin felt the world spin around him. It all made sense now. The way Isabella had appeared just when he needed her most. The briefcase found near his office, it was all connected. Life had a cruel way of making things intersect. "What do you want, Morris?" Morris smiled. It was the smile of someone who knew he held all the cards. "I want back what's mine. 20% of Caldwell Engineering, shareholder stake, a voice in decisions, a share of the profits, all documented and legalized. In return, this story never sees the light of day. The documents disappear. You continue your happy little life with your adopted daughter. No one discovers the connection and everyone moves on. And if I refuse?" Morris stood up, putting the documents back in his briefcase. "Then tomorrow morning, the city's major newspapers will receive a complete dossier, with documents, photos, testimonies. The story of poor Julia and how Caldwell Engineering destroyed her life, and how its owner now tries to redeem himself by adopting the child that he himself, indirectly, left orphaned. You have until noon tomorrow to decide. After that, there's no going back." Morris left the room without looking back, leaving Franklin alone with the crushing weight of that revelation. Franklin sat in his chair for a long time, staring at the documents on his desk. Julia, Isabella's mother, a woman he had fired without a second thought, blindly trusting reports and evidence he now realized were incomplete. A woman whose life he had unknowingly helped to destroy, and Isabella, his daughter, his girl, the child he had learned to love as he never thought he could love. What would he tell her? How would he explain that, in a way, he was partly responsible for the situation she was in when they met? Franklin picked up the phone and called Helen, his lawyer. He explained the situation, read the documents to her, described Morris's blackmail. Helen listened in silence and then, in a serious voice, gave her opinion. "Franklin, legally speaking, you did nothing wrong at the time. The dismissal was based on evidence, even if it was incomplete. There's no crime, no lawsuit that can be brought against you. But morally, ethically, and in terms of public image, this could be devastating. Morris knows that. He's exploiting the guilt you feel and the fear of what this revelation could cause. And what do I do?" Helen sighed. "You have two options. Give in to the blackmail and give Morris what he wants, buying his silence, or refuse and deal with the consequences of the public revelation. Prepare a defense. Tell your side of the story. Try to control the damage. They're not easy options, Franklin, but the decision has to be yours." Franklin hung up the phone and stared out the window at the city below. New York continued its frantic pace, indifferent to the personal dramas of its inhabitants. He thought of Isabella at home, probably doing homework with Mrs. Sylvia, or drawing or reading, one of the many books they had bought together. He thought of the foundation they were building, of the projects they had to help other children, of everything he had planned for the future, and he thought of Morris, a greedy and unscrupulous man who didn't deserve a cent of his company. The decision was easier than Franklin expected. He wasn't going to give in. He wasn't going to let Morris blackmail him. He wasn't going to build his new life on lies and concessions to bad people. He would face the consequences, however painful they might be. He would tell the truth, to Isabella, to the world, to anyone who would listen. That night when he got home, Isabella immediately noticed that something was wrong. Franklin was pale, tense, distant. She watched him during dinner, noticing how he barely touched his food, how his eyes seemed to be somewhere else. "Dad, what happened?" Franklin looked at her, at those deep brown eyes he now knew were inherited from Julia. He took a deep breath and decided she deserved the truth. "Isabella, I need to tell you something important, something about your mother." And then, with a choked voice, Franklin told her everything. About Julia working at Caldwell Engineering, about the dismissal, about how he now believed she had been unjustly accused, about Morris and his blackmail, about the decision not to give in and to face the public revelation. Isabella listened in silence, Her face showed no emotion, but Franklin could see the storm raging behind those eyes. When he finished, they sat in silence for a long moment. Finally, Isabella spoke, her voice low but firm. "My mom always said she was innocent, that she had been wronged. I was little, I didn't really understand what had happened. I just knew that suddenly she didn't have a job anymore, and everything became difficult." Franklin felt the tears begin to fall. "Isabella, I am so sorry, so sorry. If I could go back in time, I would investigate more thoroughly. I would give her a chance to defend herself, but I can't. I can only try to do the right thing now. And the right thing is not to give in to Morris, it's to face this head on. But that means the story will become public. People will talk. It might be hard for you. For us." Isabella stood up from her chair, walked around the table and stood in front of Franklin. Then, with a determination that didn't match her few years, she said, "I don't care what people will say. I know who you are. I know you didn't know who I was when you found me. I know you're not doing this out of guilt or to clear your conscience. You're doing this because you genuinely care. And that's all that matters to me. We'll face this together, as a family." Franklin hugged her, crying openly now. This girl who had every right to be furious, to feel betrayed, to blame him, was there, offering support and understanding. He didn't deserve this, he didn't deserve her, but he was going to spend the rest of his life trying to. The next day, at exactly noon, Franklin called Morris. "My answer is no. I'm not giving you anything. Do what you have to do." Morris laughed on the other end of the line. "You're going to regret this, Franklin. Big time." And he hung up. 2 hours later, the first journalist started calling. The next day, the story was in every newspaper, news site, and television program. "Businessman adopts daughter of ex-employee he unjustly fired." The headlines were sensationalist, the articles full of speculation and half-truths. Franklin prepared an official statement. He admitted that Julia had worked for him. He admitted that the dismissal had been hasty and likely unjust. He apologized publicly, even though she was no longer there to hear it. He explained that he didn't know who Isabella was when he found her, that the love and care he had for her were genuine, that he was creating the Sidewalk Hope Foundation precisely to try to make a difference in the lives of other children. The public's reaction was unpredictable. There were, of course, harsh criticisms, people who accused him of hypocrisy, of trying to redeem himself at the expense of a child, of using Isabella as a public relations tool. But there was also, surprisingly, a tsunami of support. Ordinary people began to share the story, not as a scandal, but as a story of second chances, of how past mistakes, even serious ones, could be acknowledged and in some way rectified, of how love could be born from the most unlikely circumstances. Single mothers who had been unjustly fired identified with Julia. Children who had lived on the streets identified with Isabella. People who believed in redemption identified with Franklin. Social media exploded with messages of support. Hashtags were created. An online fundraiser to help finance the Sidewalk Hope Foundation raised, in just 1 week, over $2 million. Business owners offered partnerships. Volunteers signed up in droves. The story that Morris thought would destroy Franklin ended up doing the exact opposite. It turned him into a symbol of second chances, of redemption, of love that transcends circumstances. And Isabella, with her impressive wisdom and maturity, gave interviews where she spoke about her mother, her life on the streets, and how Franklin had taken her in. Her sincerity, her capacity for forgiveness, her mature perspective on complex situations touched millions of hearts. 3 months after the revelation, the Sidewalk Hope Foundation officially opened its doors. The inauguration event was covered by all major media outlets. Hundreds of people attended, politicians, business leaders, artists, but mostly ordinary people who had been touched by the story. Isabella, now officially Isabella Caldwell after the adoption process was finalized, was the foundation's ambassador. She was the one who cut the ribbon at the entrance. She was the one who gave the opening speech, speaking with an eloquence that impressed everyone. "My name is Isabella. A few months ago I was sleeping on the streets. I didn't know where my next meal would come from. I had no one in the world. Today I have a father who loves me, a home, an education, a future. But I can't forget where I came from. I can't forget the children who are still out there, cold, hungry, scared. This foundation exists for them, to give them the same chance I had, a chance to start over, a chance to dream, a chance to live. The applause was deafening. Many had tears in their eyes. Franklin, standing beside Isabella, felt his heart overflow with pride and love. In the following months, the Sidewalk Hope Foundation took dozens of children off the streets. It offered shelter, food, education, and psychological support. It worked tirelessly to find adoptive families or reconnect children with their biological families when possible. The success was so great that they began planning to open a second facility. Isabella continued to study, grow, and develop. She was enrolled in a private school where she quickly made friends and stood out as a brilliant and sensitive student. She took dance classes, which she loved, and had started learning the guitar, discovering a surprising talent for music. And Franklin, completely transformed by the experience, had found a perfect balance between his professional and personal life. Caldwell Engineering continued to thrive, but now with a greater purpose. A significant portion of the profits went to the foundation, and Franklin had created a new division in the company, specializing in affordable housing, building decent and accessible homes for low-income families. Morris Bradford, on the other hand, disappeared from New York's business scene. His businesses failed, his reputation was destroyed by the unsuccessful blackmail attempt, and he had to move to another city, to start over, away from the spotlight and public humiliation. One night, months after all this, Franklin and Isabella were on the sofa watching a movie together when Isabella paused the screen and turned to him. "Dad, do you think my mum would be proud of me?" Franklin held her hand in his. "I am absolutely certain she would be. She would be immensely proud of the incredible woman you are becoming, and I believe that somehow she is seeing all of this, and she is at peace knowing that you are okay, that you are happy, that you are making a difference in the world." Isabella smiled, her eyes shining. "I like to think about that she's watching, that she knows it wasn't in vain, that something beautiful was born from her." Franklin hugged his daughter, feeling gratitude and love fill every cell of his body. They had weathered storms. They had gone through painful revelations, blackmail, public judgment, but they had come out stronger on the other side, united. A true family, built not just on adoption papers, but on choice, on love, on mutual commitment, and together they were changing not only their own lives, but the lives of hundreds of other children who now had hope where there was once only despair. The years passed like leaves carried by the wind. Isabella grew up before Franklin's eyes, transforming from a fragile, frightened girl into a strong, determined young woman, full of dreams. Each birthday was celebrated with a party, with cake, with carefully chosen gifts. But more than material gifts, Franklin gave her what she needed most: presence, unconditional love, and support in every challenge she faced. When Isabella turned 14, Franklin organized a special party at the apartment. He invited her school friends, the foundation staff who had become like an extended family, Mrs. Sylvia, who still occasionally gave private lessons, and everyone who had been part of their journey. The living room was decorated with blue and green balloons, Isabella's favorite colors, and there was a table laden with food and sweets. In the middle of the party, as everyone sang Happy Birthday and Isabella blew out the candles, Franklin saw tears streaming down her face, tears of happiness, of gratitude, of pure emotion. Later, after the guests had gone and they were cleaning up the mess together, Isabella said something that deeply touched Franklin's heart. "Dad, do you remember the day you found me on the Park Avenue sidewalk? Like it was yesterday." Isabella smiled, a nostalgic smile. "Sometimes I still can't believe all of this is real, that I have a home, a family, a future. That day, I was so desperate, not for lack of food or a place to sleep, but because of the loneliness, the feeling that no one in the world cared if I existed or not. And then you appeared, running after me as if your life depended on it. It did, in a way I couldn't even imagine at the time." Isabella came closer and hugged Franklin tightly. "Thank you for everything, for choosing me, for fighting for me, for believing I was worth it." Franklin returned the hug, feeling tears wet his own eyes. "You were always worth it, Isabella, from the very first moment, and every day with you is a gift." The Sidewalk Hope Foundation had expanded exponentially. They now had 3 centers in New York City, one in Chicago and another in Washington, D.C. Hundreds of children had passed through their doors, receiving care, education, and love. Many had been adopted by loving families. Others had managed to reconnect with distant relatives. Some, already teenagers, had received vocational training and found decent jobs, starting their adult lives with support and structure. Isabella continued to be the ambassador and face of the foundation. She gave talks at schools, participated in charity events, and spoke with potential donors and partners. Her ability to speak about the reality of the streets with first-hand knowledge, but also about hope and transformation, was unique and powerful. She inspired people. She made them see beyond stereotypes, beyond prejudice, beyond indifference. At school, Isabella was an exemplary student. She earned excellent grades in all subjects, but had a particular passion for art and mathematics, an unusual combination that intrigued her teachers. She loved to draw, to create, to imagine spaces and forms. But she also loved the precision of numbers, the logic of equations, the satisfaction of solving complex problems. When it came time to choose a career path for college, Isabella had no doubts. She wanted to study architecture. She wanted to learn how to design spaces that made people's lives better. She wanted to create homes, buildings, and cities designed for human dignity, not just for profit. Franklin enthusiastically supported her choice. He hired a college prep tutor, helped Isabella assemble a portfolio of her drawings and projects, and accompanied her on university visits. And when the results came out, the joy was immense. Isabella had been accepted into Columbia University's Graduate School of Architecture, Planning and Preservation, one of the most prestigious in the country. The first day of class was emotional. Franklin insisted on taking her to the campus, even though she said she was old enough to go by herself. He wanted to be there. He wanted to see his daughter walk through those doors toward a brilliant future, a future she had earned with effort, dedication, and resilience. "Are you nervous?" "A little, but also excited, very excited." Franklin smiled and gently touched her face. "You're going to do wonderfully. I'm absolutely sure of it." Isabella entered the university building and turned one last time to wave at Franklin. He waved back, feeling a mixture of pride, anticipatory longing, and joy. His little girl was growing up. She was becoming an incredible woman, and he had the privilege of being by her side every step of this journey. The college years were intense for Isabella. She dove headfirst into her studies, the technical disciplines, the design studios, the discussions on urbanism and social responsibility. She found professors who inspired her, classmates who became great friends, and an ever-growing passion for architecture focused on social housing. Her academic projects always had a social slant: dignified, affordable housing, community spaces that promoted integration, urban renewal that considered the most vulnerable people. Her professors were impressed not only with the technical quality of her work, but with the human depth of her proposals. Franklin followed everything closely. He listened to Isabella talk about her projects during dinner, visited the work exhibitions at the university, and offered the perspective of someone with decades of experience in the construction industry. Father and daughter had also become intellectual partners, exchanging ideas on how to build a better world through architecture and urbanism. Caldwell Engineering had undergone significant transformations over those years. Franklin had gradually redirected the company's focus. They still did conventional commercial and residential projects, but the affordable housing division had become the most important and largest. They built dignified housing complexes with complete infrastructure, green areas, and communal spaces. They worked in partnership with governments and social organizations to provide quality housing to low-income families. The company's reputation had transformed. They were no longer just a successful construction company. They were a company that made a difference, that had genuine social responsibility, that put profit second when it came to human dignity. And ironically, this change in attitude had attracted even more clients and partners, companies and individuals who wanted to be associated with a brand that represented values. On a special evening, when Isabella was in her final year of college, Franklin took her to dinner at one of New York's most elegant restaurants. It was an important occasion. He had something to tell her. During dinner, after they had talked about her final college projects, the upcoming graduation and plans and dreams, Franklin became serious and took Isabella's hand across the table. "Isabella, I have something important to tell you. I've been thinking a lot about the future. About my future, your future, the future of Caldwell Engineering." Isabella looked at him attentively, sensing the solemnity of the moment. Franklin continued, "I built this company from scratch. I worked for it for 15 years before I met you, and after you arrived I continued to work, but with a different purpose. Today, looking back, I realize that everything I did before I found you seems empty. The buildings, the contracts, the money, none of it matters as much as what we've built together. The foundation, the social projects, the difference we make in people's lives." Isabella squeezed his hand, encouraging him to continue. "I've been thinking about transforming Caldwell Engineering. I no longer want to be a conventional construction company. Want us to dedicate ourselves completely to social architecture, affordable housing, community spaces, projects that truly change lives. But this is a big decision, one that will affect many people, many employees, many contracts. And before I make this decision, I need to know what you think, because you are a fundamental part of all this." Isabella was silent for a moment, absorbing the weight of his words. Then, with her eyes shining, she replied, "Dad, I think that's the most beautiful decision you could make. I've always dreamed of working in social architecture, of creating dignified spaces for people who have never had that opportunity. If Caldwell Engineering dedicates itself entirely to that, it would be like fulfilling my biggest professional dream, and I would be honored to be part of that transformation." Franklin smiled, his heart overflowing with joy and pride. "Then it's decided. As soon as you graduate, we'll start this new phase. Together, as partners, as father and daughter, as partners in building a better world." Isabella stood up, walked around the table, and hugged Franklin right there in the middle of the elegant restaurant, not caring about the curious glances of other diners. "Thank you for including me in this, for believing in me, for building this future with me." Isabella's graduation day was one of the most emotional days of Franklin's life. The ceremony took place in the university's grand auditorium, packed with family, friends, and professors. Isabella looked beautiful in her cap and gown, a radiant smile on her face. When they called her name, Isabella Caldwell, and she walked onto the stage to receive her diploma, the entire audience rose to their feet in applause. Franklin was in the front row, tears streaming freely down his face. That was his daughter, the girl he had found barefoot on the sidewalk, clutching a leather briefcase. And now there she was, a graduate in architecture, ready to change the world. But the most special moment was yet to come. Isabella had been chosen to give the commencement speech on behalf of her class. She stepped up to the podium, adjusted the microphone, and began to speak. Her voice was firm, clear, emotional. "Dear colleagues, professors, family, and friends, today we celebrate not just the completion of a degree, but the beginning of a journey where we will have the power to transform spaces, cities, and lives. Architecture is not just about aesthetics or functionality. It's about human dignity. It's about creating places where people can live, not just survive." Isabella paused, looking out at the audience. "I know what I'm talking about, because 15 years ago I had no place. I slept on sidewalks, under overpasses, in awnings. I had no roof, no walls, nothing I could call home. And then, through a combination of chance and destiny, I met someone who gave me not just a roof but a home, not just walls but love, my father who is here today." Franklin felt every head in the room turn towards him. He wiped his tears, trying to maintain his composure. Isabella continued, her voice growing more emotional. "This man taught me that architecture is a responsibility, That every brick we lay, every wall we raise, every house we build can be the difference between despair and hope for someone. And it is with this awareness that I want to begin my career. Not building for the rich, for the powerful, for those who already have everything, but building for those who have nothing, for the invisible, for the forgotten. A reverent silence fell over the auditorium. Therefore, today, on this very special day, I am making an announcement. My father and I have decided to transform Caldwell Engineering into a company dedicated exclusively to social architecture and urbanism. We will build dignified homes for those who have never had one. We will create community spaces in forgotten neighborhoods. We will plan entire cities designed for inclusion, not exclusion. And we invite all of you, my fellow graduates, to join us in this mission. Because true success is not measured by the size of the buildings we construct, but by the size of the impact we have on people's lives. The applause was deafening. People stood up, clapped, shouted their approval. Franklin was sobbing, not even trying to hide his tears. That was his daughter, that incredible, eloquent, committed, passionate woman, and he had the privilege of being her father. After the ceremony, dozens of new graduates approached Franklin and Isabella. They wanted to know more about the project. They wanted to apply for jobs at the company. They wanted to be part of this architectural and social revolution. It was more than Franklin and Isabella had ever imagined. It was a movement being born. In the following months, the transformation of Caldwell Engineering took place. Franklin gradually phased out the conventional contracts they still had ongoing. He restructured the company, hired new architects and engineers specializing in social housing, and established partnerships with governments, NGOs, and social movements. The company ceased to be just Caldwell Engineering and became Caldwell Social Architecture. Isabella took on the role of partner and director of projects. She and Franklin worked side by side, complementing each other perfectly. She, with her innovative ideas, her social sensitivity, her ability to see beyond the obvious. He, with his experience, his network of contacts, his skill in negotiating and making complex projects viable. The first major project of the new phase was a housing complex on the east side of New York City. 1,000 residential units, designed with dignity and beauty. They weren't just stacked concrete boxes. They were real homes, with generous spaces, natural ventilation, adequate lighting, shared green areas, a playground for children, a community garden, and a community center. Isabella led the architectural design. She made a point of talking with the families who would live there. She listened to their needs, their dreams, their suggestions. She incorporated all of it into the design. The result was something unique which respected the dignity of each future resident. The inauguration of the housing complex was a massive event. Authorities and the press attended, but mainly the 1,000 families who were to receive the keys to their new homes. When Isabella and Franklin symbolically handed over the first keys, the emotion was palpable. People cried, hugged each other, gave thanks. An elderly woman, upon receiving the key to her home, hugged Isabella and whispered in her ear, "Thank you, my child. Thank you for seeing us, for remembering that we exist, for giving us dignity." Isabella hugged the woman back, crying too. "You don't have to thank me. This is just the beginning. We're going to build so much more. For you, for your family, for everyone who needs it." Franklin watched from a distance, his heart overflowing. He looked at the housing complex, at the happy families, at Isabella talking with the residents, and he thought about how surprising life was. 15 years ago, he was desperate, on the verge of losing everything, and a barefoot girl with a leather briefcase had changed the entire course of his existence. That briefcase he so desperately needed to find had brought more than just documents. It had brought purpose, love, family, and a greater mission. It had shown him that true success wasn't in tall buildings, million-dollar contracts, or corporate recognition. It was in making a difference, in looking into someone's eyes and seeing hope where there was once despair. That night, at home, after an exhausting but wonderful day, Franklin and Isabella were sitting on the sofa, each with a cup of tea in their hands in a comfortable silence that only people who know each other deeply can share. Isabella broke the silence. "Dad, have you ever stopped to think about everything that's happened since that day on Park Avenue?" Every day, my dear. Every single day. Isabella smiled. Sometimes it feels like yesterday. Other times it feels like another lifetime. But you know what I think? That everything had to happen exactly as it did, even the hard parts, even the mistakes, because it all brought us here. Franklin nodded. You're right. And you know what's most incredible? It's that this isn't an ending, it's a beginning. We have so many projects ahead of us. So many houses to build, so many lives to transform. Isabella raised her teacup in a toast. To new beginnings, then, and to the family we chose to be. Franklin raised his own cup. To the family we chose to be, and to the love that builds bridges where there were once only chasms. They toasted, their eyes shining with happy tears. Outside, New York City continued its frantic pace, millions of lives intertwining, stories being written every second. But there, in that Upper East Side apartment, two of those stories had intertwined so perfectly that it was impossible to imagine one without the other. Franklin thought of Julia, Isabella's mother, and silently thanked her for raising such an extraordinary daughter. He apologized again, even knowing she couldn't hear him, for the mistakes of the past. And he promised that he would continue to honor her memory through the love and care he had for Isabella. Isabella, in turn, thought of all the children still on the streets of New York, of all of America, of the whole world. And she renewed her promise to continue fighting for them, to use her voice, her education, her resources to make a difference. The following years were of intense and fulfilling work. Caldwell Social Architecture grew, opened offices in several cities, and managed dozens of projects simultaneously. They built not only housing complexes, but also schools, health clinics, and community centers, always with the same principle: dignity for all. Isabella became a national reference in social architecture. She gave lectures across the country, published articles in specialized magazines, and inspired a new generation of architects to think beyond profit and aesthetics, to think about social impact. Franklin, now in his 60s, had found the peace and fulfillment he had always sought, but never known how to define. He saw his legacy not in the buildings he had constructed in the past, but in the lives he was transforming in the present. And his greatest pride was being able to do it alongside his daughter. One afternoon, exactly 15 years after that encounter on the Park Avenue sidewalk, Franklin and Isabella decided to take a special walk. They returned to the place where it all began. They stood on the same sidewalk, watching the constant flow of the avenue. "It was here," Isabella said, pointing to the ground. "I was right here, clutching the briefcase with no idea that my life was about to change completely." Franklin looked at the spot and smiled. "And I was up there, on the 25th floor, looking out the window, also with no idea that I was about to find the most important thing in my life, you." They hugged right there on the busy sidewalk, people passing around them, indifferent to a scene that for them meant everything. When they separated, Isabella had tears in her eyes, but she was smiling. "You know what's funny? That day I thought I was saving you by giving back the briefcase. But really, you were the one who saved me. You gave me a family, a home, a future, a purpose." Franklin shook his head gently. "No, my dear. The truth is, we saved each other. I gave you structure and love. But you gave me meaning. You showed me what really matters. You made me a better person. Without you, I would have just remained a successful but empty businessman. With you, I became a father, a partner, someone who makes a difference." Isabella hugged Franklin again. "So we were lucky to have found each other, to have chosen each other, to have built all of this together." "More than lucky," Franklin said. "We were blessed." They stood there for a few more minutes, absorbing the meaning of that place, that moment, that journey. Then, hand in hand, they began to walk down Park Avenue, father and daughter, partners in business and in life, two souls who found each other at the exact moment they both needed it most. And as they walked, Franklin thought about how life had a peculiar way of working, how a moment of despair could turn into a blessing, how a lost briefcase could be the beginning of a story of love and redemption, how an invisible child could change the world simply by existing and by being seen. The story of Franklin and Isabella wasn't a story about business, corporate success, or public recognition. It was a story about humanity, about looking beyond appearances and seeing the inherent value in every human being, about how saving someone sometimes means being saved too, about how love can flourish in the most unlikely places and become the most transformative force in the universe. And it was a story that was far from over, because every house they built, every family they helped, every child they took off the streets was a new chapter being written, a chapter of hope, of dignity, of love in action. Franklin looked at Isabella, walking beside him, and felt a gratitude so deep it was almost painful. This girl, now a woman, had been the greatest gift life could have given him, and he would spend every remaining day of his existence trying to be worthy of that gift, building, creating, loving, transforming, together, as it was always meant to be. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Franklin and Isabella has touched your heart. If you were moved by this journey of love, redemption, and transformation, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments what part of this story resonated with you the most. Every day we bring intense stories like this one, which reveal the deepest side of the human soul and show that there is always hope, even in the most difficult situations. Your presence here is very important to us. We look forward to seeing you in the next episode with another story that will touch your soul.